Welcome back, Seekers of Forgotten Wonders. I am Osric the Tale-Binder, and today we venture into one of history's most persistent and far-reaching legends. A tale that captivated the minds of popes, kings, and explorers for nearly 5 centuries. Imagine receiving word that somewhere far beyond the known world, a powerful Christian king ruled a vast empire of unimaginable riches, where rivers ran with gold, mystical creatures roamed, and the fountain of youth bubbled forth its restorative waters. A kingdom where Christianity flourished in splendor, even as Europe struggled against the encroaching forces of Islam. This was not merely a traveler's tall tale whispered in taverns. This was a belief held by the most powerful and educated men of medieval Europe, a belief that launched expeditions, shaped maps, and altered the course of history itself. This is the legend of Prester John and his lost kingdom, a realm that everyone was certain existed if only they could find it. To understand why the legend of Prester John took such a powerful hold on the medieval European imagination, we must first understand the world as it appeared to Christians in the 12th century. The First Crusade had recaptured Jerusalem in 1099, but the Holy Land remained under constant threat. Islam had spread across North Africa, through Spain, and into the Middle East, seemingly encircling Christendom. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of the once mighty Roman Empire, was weakening, creating a power vacuum that threatened to be filled by non-Christian forces. Beyond the known lands lay mystery. Accounts from ancient writers like Pliny and travelers like Marco Polo told of dog-headed men, people with faces in their chests, and other marvels. The geography of Asia remained shrouded in speculation and fantasy. In this context, rumors of a powerful Christian ally in the East, a king who could help turn the tide against Islam and restore Christian rule, were more than welcome. They were desperately needed. The stage was set for what might be the most successful and long-lived geographical myth in European history. The legend of Prester John first appears in European written record in the Chronicle of Otto, Bishop of Freising, in 1145. Otto reported meeting Hugh, Bishop of Jabala in Syria, at the papal court of Pope Eugenius III. According to Otto's account, Bishop Hugh spoke of a certain John, a king and priest who lives in the extreme Orient, beyond Persia and Armenia. This Prester John, Prester being derived from the Latin presbyter, meaning priest, was said to be a descendant of the Magi mentioned in the Bible, those wise men who visited the infant Jesus. Most remarkably, Hugh claimed this Christian king had recently won a great victory against the Muslims, defeating the Persians in a tremendous battle before marching toward Jerusalem to aid the Crusaders, though for reasons unexplained, he had been unable to cross the Tigris River and had returned to his kingdom. This tantalizing rapport, a powerful Christian king in the East who had defeated the Muslims and attempted to aid the Crusaders, fell on eager ears. He was the ally that Christendom desperately needed. But was there any truth to it? Bishop Hugh may have been referring to real events, specifically the defeat of the Seljuk Turks by the non-Christian Mongol leader Yelu-Dashi at the Battle of Katwan in 1141. The news of this battle, filtered through distance and translation, might have transformed a Mongol Khan into a Christian king. What began as a misinterpreted historical event was about to evolve into something far more elaborate. In 1165, something extraordinary happened. A letter purporting to be from Prester John himself began circulating throughout Europe. Addressed to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Comnenus, copies quickly spread to the courts of the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, and others. This remarkable document, this letter, is one of the most fascinating literary creations of the medieval period. Allow me to share some of its astonishing claims. I, Prester John, who reigns supreme, exceed in riches, virtue and power all creatures who dwell under heaven. 72 kings pay tribute to me. I am a devout Christian and everywhere protect the Christians of our empire. The letter describes a kingdom of breathtaking wonder. In Prester John's realm, honey flows from the trees. A river emerging from paradise runs with gold and precious gems. His palace is built after the design shown to Thomas the Apostle by God himself. The letter describes pepper forests guarded by serpents, magical stones that confer invisibility, seas of sand that move like water, fountains of youth, and mysterious salamanders that live in fire. The kingdom contains humans of normal appearance, but also dog-headed men, giants, cyclopes, centaurs, and other marvels. Most importantly, it portrays Prester John as immensely wealthy, powerfully militarized with armies of thousands, and devoutly Christian, making him the perfect ally for European powers. This letter, though certainly a European creation, rather than an authentic Eastern document, became one of the most widely circulated texts of the Middle Ages. It was translated into numerous languages, copied and recopied, with details added or changed over time. But why was such an obvious fantasy so readily believed by educated people? The answer lies not just in wishful thinking, but in the medieval worldview itself. To our modern minds, the ready acceptance of such fantastical elements may seem naive. But to understand the appeal of Prester John's letter, we must step into the medieval worldview. For the educated European of the 12th century, the world was still very much as described by ancient authorities like Pliny the Elder, whose natural history documented monstrous races, thought to inhabit distant lands. These were not viewed as mere fantasies, but as documented facts by trusted authorities. When reinforced by religious texts like the Alexander Romance and the Legends of the Apostle Thomas in India, such descriptions formed a coherent picture of the mysterious East. Medieval maps placed Jerusalem at the center of the world, with the three known continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, arranged around it. The edges of these maps often featured illustrations of these strange beings and creatures, not as decorative elements, but as documentation of what travelers would encounter in distant lands. The boundaries between what we now consider natural history, theology, and fantasy were simply not drawn in the same way. The world was understood to be filled with divine purpose and meaning, with marvels that testified to God's infinite creativity. In this context, the idea of a powerful Christian kingdom in the mysterious East, ruled by a priest king descended from biblical figures, fit perfectly within the existing framework of medieval knowledge. The letter's fantastical elements were not seen as evidence against its authenticity, but rather as confirmation of what was already known about the East. The letter of Prester John had a profound impact on European powers. In 1177, Pope Alexander III drew up a response addressed to Prester John, which he entrusted to his physician Philip to deliver. Philip departed for the East and vanished from historical record. Whether he died on the journey, abandoned his mission, or simply failed to find the mythical king, we do not know, but this marked the beginning of a centuries-long search. Subsequent popes dispatched missions, encouraging Christian emissaries to seek out the kingdom. Dominicans, Franciscans, and other travelers ventured eastward, always with an eye toward finding the elusive Christian king. When the Mongols emerged as a world power in the 13th century, Europeans initially wondered if these might be Prester John's armies at last. Reports reached Europe that some Mongol tribes practiced a form of Christianity, Nestorian Christianity, which seemed to confirm suspicions. Marco Polo, in his travels to the court of Kublai Khan in the late 13th century, heard tales of a great Christian king called Prester John, who had been defeated by Genghis Khan. This may have referred to the real Mongol defeat of a Christian Karaite tribe led by a chief named Tuhrul. For a time, it seemed Prester John might have been a Mongol ruler, but as European knowledge of Asia grew more accurate through increased travel and trade, the evidence for a great Christian empire in Asia became increasingly thin. Yet rather than abandoning the legend, Europeans simply relocated it. By the 14th century, something remarkable happened to the legend of Prester John. As Europeans gained more knowledge about Asia through increased trade and travel, the likelihood of a hidden Christian kingdom there diminished. Yet rather than abandoning this appealing legend, European imagination simply transplanted Prester John from Asia to Africa, specifically to Ethiopia. This geographical shift was made easier by medieval confusion about India. The term was often used for any distant exotic land, with scholars distinguishing between Greater India, the Indian subcontinent, Middle India, often Persia or parts of Asia, and Lesser India, which sometimes referred to Ethiopia or East Africa. Ethiopia had been a Christian kingdom since the 4th century, practicing a form of Christianity that had developed largely in isolation from European Catholicism. European awareness of this African Christian kingdom grew in the 14th and 15th centuries. The medieval mind, rather than seeing this as a separate development, simply concluded that these must be the people ruled by Prester John, whose kingdom had been misplaced on earlier maps. Maps began to show Prester John ruling in Abyssinia, Ethiopia, wearing a cross and holding a scepter. The same fantastic elements from the original letter, rivers of gold, fountains of youth, exotic creatures, were now transported to this African setting. This remarkable ability of the legend to adapt, to migrate across continents, rather than fade away when confronted with contradictory evidence, speaks to its powerful hold on the medieval imagination. The legend of Prester John took on new significance in the 15th century, particularly for the Portuguese. Prince Henry the Navigator and subsequent Portuguese monarchs saw potential strategic value in an alliance with this Christian African king. If Portugal could establish contact with Prester John's kingdom, they could create a powerful Christian alliance that would encircle the Muslim world and gain advantage in both military and trade endeavors. King John II of Portugal was particularly determined. In 1487, he dispatched two explorers, Pero de Covilhã and Afonso de Paiva, with instructions to find India and the kingdom of Prester John. De Paiva died on the journey, but Covilhã successfully reached Ethiopia in 1490. He was not permitted to leave by the Ethiopian emperor, but he managed to send a message back to Portugal confirming that Ethiopia was indeed a Christian kingdom, though perhaps not quite as fantastic as the legends described. The Portuguese persistence eventually bore fruit. In 1520, a Portuguese embassy led by Rodrigo de Lima arrived at the court of Emperor Lebna Dengel of Ethiopia. The Portuguese referred to him as Prester John, much to the confusion of the Ethiopians themselves, who had never heard this title. For the Portuguese, this diplomatic contact represented the culmination of a centuries-long quest. They had finally found their legendary Christian ally, even if the reality was considerably more mundane than the rivers of gold and magical creatures described in the famous letter. The Ethiopian emperor, for his part, saw a potential advantage in alliance with a fellow Christian power, particularly as his kingdom faced increasing pressure from neighboring Muslim states. The Ethiopia that Portuguese emissaries discovered was indeed Christian, but with traditions very different from European Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had developed its own distinct practices, liturgy, and religious calendar. The magnificent rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, carved from solid stone in the 12th and 13th centuries, testified to the deep Christian devotion of the Ethiopians. Yet these marvels were quite different from the golden palaces described in Prester John's letter. The Portuguese encountered a real kingdom with real challenges, including conflicts with neighboring Muslim states and internal political complexities, rather than the fantastical Christian utopia of European imagination. Ethiopia did have a ruler who combined religious and secular authority, as their emperors claimed descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This may have reinforced the Europeans' willingness to identify the Ethiopian monarch as the legendary priest king. What's particularly fascinating is that while Europeans were searching for Prester John, Ethiopians had their own centuries-old traditions about distant Christian allies. The Ethiopian chronicle known as the Kebranagus mentions a Christian king who would come to their aid, but this king was expected to come from Rome, not the other way around. The meeting of these two Christian traditions, each with legends about the other, created a curious mirror image of mutual mythologizing. When Portuguese military assistance later helped Ethiopia repel an Ottoman invasion in the 1540s, it seemed to both sides that ancient prophecies were being fulfilled. The legend of Prester John, spanning continents and centuries, had an enormous cultural impact that extended far beyond politics and exploration. In literature, references to Prester John appear in works ranging from Dante's Divine Comedy and Ariosto's Orlando Furioso to Sir John Mandeville's Travels and Umberto Eco's modern novel Bordolino. The visual arts depicted him as an exotic Eastern king, sometimes with dark skin, sometimes with European features, but always with the dual symbols of cross and crown to signify his unique status as priest king. Cartography was dramatically influenced by the legend. For centuries, maps of Asia and later Africa featured Prester John's kingdom, often illustrated with vignettes of the ruler and the marvels described in his letter. These maps guided real expeditions and shaped geographical understanding. Musical works, including operas and oratorios, took inspiration from the tale. The 17th century opera Il Pretiani by Francesco Lucio and later works incorporated elements of the exotic kingdom and its ruler. During the Age of Exploration, the quest for Prester John helped motivate European ventures into unknown territories. Portugal's exploration of the African coast was partly driven by the desire to circumnavigate Africa and establish contact with this legendary ally. Even in modern times, the legend has continued to capture imagination through novels, films, and games. The enduring appeal of a distant, mysterious Christian kingdom speaks to our fascination with the unknown and the exotic. Why did the legend of Prester John endure for so long, from its first mention in 1145 well into the 17th century? What gave this particular myth such remarkable staying power? First, the legend fulfilled a profound psychological and political need. In a Europe that felt increasingly threatened by expanding Islamic powers, the idea of a powerful Christian ally in the East provided hope and comfort. Second, the legend demonstrated remarkable adaptability. When evidence mounted against Prester John's kingdom being in Asia, the legend simply migrated to Africa. When the real Ethiopia proved less fantastic than the legend, Europeans focused on the kernels of truth. He was Christian, it did have a powerful monarch, and downplayed the discrepancies. Third, the legends served practical purposes for various groups. For explorers and traders, the search for Prester John justified expeditions that might otherwise seem too risky or costly. For rulers and popes, diplomatic outreach to find this kingdom demonstrated their commitment to expanding Christendom. But perhaps most importantly, the legend of Prester John speaks to a universal human desire to believe that somewhere beyond the horizon exists a better world, a place where problems that seem insurmountable in our own society have been solved. In the medieval Christian imagination, this took the form of a powerful, wealthy Christian kingdom that had successfully integrated faith with worldly power. For a Europe struggling with the proper relationship between church and state, this represented an idealized solution. The legend reveals how powerfully our hopes and fears shape our understanding of the unknown. When Europeans looked into the blank spaces on their maps, they saw not just unexplored territories, but the reflection of their own deepest wishes. The legend of Prester John, with its fantastic kingdom, its rivers of gold, and its powerful Christian king, ultimately proved to be just that, a legend. Yet its impact on history was as real as any verifiable fact. This myth helped launch voyages of exploration, shaped European cartography for centuries, influenced diplomatic missions, and left its mark on literature, art, and the European understanding of distant lands. Though the kingdom described in the famous letter never existed, the legend did lead Europeans to discover the very real Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, a nation with its own rich history, traditions, and struggles, far more complex and human than the idealized realm of Prester John. Perhaps the most valuable insight we can take from this centuries-long search for a kingdom that never existed is how powerfully our hopes, fears, and needs shape our view of the unknown. Just as medieval Europeans projected their desires onto the blank spaces of their maps, we too may be filling the unknowns in our world with reflections of our own dreams and anxieties. The enduring appeal of Prester John reminds us that myths need not be factually true to change the world. This legend inspired real people to undertake real journeys that changed the course of history and expanded the known world. When next we meet, we shall explore another forgotten legend, one that tells of King Hurla and his spectral followers, forever riding through the night skies in a wild hunt that brings doom to all who witness it. Until then, remember that the boundary between myth and reality is often more permeable than we might think, for what begins as fantasy may end by changing reality itself. I am Osric the Tale-Binder. Until our paths cross again, fare thee well.